very much for joining us this lovely evening for our latest and our first in-person session of Insider's View, Uzbekistan at the crossroads between East and West. Insider's View is one of MAP's series that seeks to explore behind-the-scenes journeys of different aspects of museums and exhibitions that inspire and engage with audiences in unique ways. Through the program, museum professionals take audiences to diverse institutions around the world and share stories, anecdotes, rewarding experiences, and challenges they face in conceptualizing as well as developing the project in focus. For today's session, we're delighted to have Dr. Yannick Lintz with us. Dr. Lintz is the president of the National Museum of Asian Art, Guimet. In France, she began her career as the director of Musée des Beaux-Arts in Agen. She has curated numerous international exhibitions, including the Splendours of Uzbekistan's Oases at the Louvre Museum, about which she'll be talking to us today. Her involvement in major cultural diplomacy initiatives translated into several large-scale and groundbreaking projects with Arab countries, Central Asia, and Iran. She has developed an international expertise on Islamic arts, museums advising on their policies, narratives, and educational challenges. Dr. Lintz is also a guest professor at the Sorbonne and Senghor University in Egypt and has taught courses on museum education and heritage, museum management and heritage education. Dr. Lintz is a Knight of the French Order of Merit and of the Legion of Honor, as well as an Officer of Arts and Letter. It's an honor to have you here, Dr. Lintz, and thank you for sharing your work with us. Before I hand over the mic, I would also like to take a moment to thank Priyanka from Signable, who is helping us with the Indian Sign Language interpretation for tonight. And to remind everyone to please switch off your phones or keep them on silent. And thank you so much for coming on board for this, Dr. Lintz. Over to you.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Abhishek Podar, all the colleagues that I met today from this wonderful museum. I feel honored to be invited today evening to share with you this wonderful experience, my last experience as curator at the Louvre before being appointed as president of Musée Guimet end of 22. So my speech is about Uzbekistan, but through the experience of the exhibition we did at the Louvre. It was a real event. It was the first time that Uzbekistan museums could present their heritage outside of Uzbekistan. They did, in fact, it's the second. They had an experience in Korea in the 90s. But here, of course, with the Louvre, it's always a specific story because the Louvre is the universal museum. That means when you imagine an exhibition on Uzbekistan at the Louvre, you have to include Uzbekistan history and Uzbekistan art history in the global history. And that's why we had two main work to develop during this preparation. One was to imagine the right storytelling about Uzbekistan heritage, and the other one was to check the artworks, because not many of them were published. We had some Russian publication from the 70s when Uzbekistan was ruled by Soviet Union. And of course, at this time, all the research was done by St. Petersburg Museum. But we didn't have much information. So it was a real adventure, a long adventure. My first trip to Uzbekistan was in 2014. So I was just appointed as 1 year before as director of the Islamic art department at the Louvre. And I was convinced that this part of the world could be very symbolic to show it at the Louvre. It wasn't easy, and I will not tell you this story of the exhibition, but it's also a real story, how I could convince the Louvre president to do something on Uzbekistan. But for me, of course, the symbol of Uzbekistan, no one knows where is Uzbekistan, somewhere in Central Asia, but with all the countries in Stan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, etc. No one knows. So it was not easy to persuade people at the Louvre that it could be a real event. But for me, 2013 was before the big terrorist attacks, but I was convinced as director of the Islamic Art Department that we had to promote cultural dialogue. And of course, the theme of the Silk Road, because you have, I think, guessed that behind this story, there is more or less a story of Silk Roads. And so I think that in a cultural context and in museums, we have not a lot of power, but we have the power to demonstrate, not through speeches and words, but through artworks, what are the cultural roads, exchanges, dialogues. And for me, Uzbekistan, with all its famous oases, Bukhara, Samarkand, mainly Bukhara and Samarkand, but other ones also, are the demonstration of what was the reality of the Silk Road. That's why I immediately decided to develop an archaeological program in Bukhara, with an archaeologist that I hired in my team. And so we, both with him, Rocco Ronte, Italian archaeologist, we developed a project of archaeological excavations in Bukhara and this exhibition. So I will not tell you all the story of this exhibition, but we started the project in 2014 and we opened it in 2022. Of course, it could have been ready for 2019, 2020, but with the COVID, it was, like in every museum, postponed. So just this first slide with the poster, and the poster you will show later has a very symbolic masterpiece that we could have in this exhibition, which is a mural painting from the 7th century from near the oasis of Burara. And with an elephant, which is rather familiar here in India, but less in Uzbekistan, because for a European audience, or I should say a Western audience, Uzbekistan, of course, in Central Asia, is more or less linked with Iranian culture. And for me, by choosing this elephant, which is more, of course, you don't find any elephant in Iranian culture. It's, for us, Western people, more linked to Indian culture. And so it was, for me, a message saying, we speak about Uzbekistan, but you can see an elephant that usually you link to India. So this was the beginning of the inquiry. And just two photos to show the opening of the exhibition with the two presidents, President Macron, and next to him, the Karimov, Mr. Karimov, who is president of Uzbekistan, and the wives, our Minister of Culture, Rima Abdul Malak. Just to show also that, of course, it's a cultural project, but it's also a diplomatic project. And we had wonderful partners in Uzbekistan. That was, of course, the Ministry of Culture and a new foundation created by the president, Karimov, that was devoted to external cultural projects and with the idea to develop culture in Uzbekistan. Why? Of course, for the population, but also to develop tourism. And with the problems of Iran and the impossibility for many people to go to Iran, it was a strategic economic and cultural priority to develop tourism in Uzbekistan. So just also because I will not give you the possibility to visit Uzbekistan through the presentation, but to visit artworks of Uzbekistan shown in this exhibition at the Louvre. So just to give you a view of the presentation of this exhibition, it was more or less 150 pieces, and so that we could show in this exhibition. The idea was to have a chronological storytelling. Of course, the main idea is to show how this country is a crossroad of Silk Road. And for us, I say for us because it was really done by Rocco Rante and myself. We were really two to do it. He as an archaeologist and me as an art historian. We always were very nervous about the idea of a Silk Road exhibition. It was, we had to fight with the communication department. They wanted, of course, to call it a Silk Road exhibition because, of course, everyone wants to see Silk Road exhibition. And for us, we really wanted to show and to focus on this crossroad. So I will not give a comment about this. So about the chronology of the exhibition, we have, which is not now so common in exhibition storytellings, but we decided to have a large chronology, starting from the 1st century to the Amur Timur or Tamerlan period, more or less 16th century. So it's a huge timeline, but it was, I think, adapted to the exhibition to show that in this country, geography determine history. And this is right. Whenever you are there, there is always a question of roads coming east from west, west from east, sometime north from south, and south from north. So the first period is what we call the kingdom of Kushan, from the 1st century to the 3rd century before. So it's before the Silk Road. Because when we speak about the Silk Road, and to be more precise, we should speak, you will see the map after, we should speak about Silk Roads, because there were always different roads, but the so-called Silk Road, that is, you may know, a recent concept invented by a German historian during the 19th century. But the chronological sequence adapted to this Silk Road is after the Kushan kingdom. So just to give you an idea, you have here fragments that we restored of the king of Kushan. It's the geography of the Kushan kingdom. The center was more or less in Uzbekistan, but it included main part of Central Asia, Afghanistan, which is south of Uzbekistan, and on the road from Uzbekistan through Afghanistan, you arrive in India. That's what Babur, the first emperor of the Mughal, understood. That means that the Kushan kingdom included north of India, or they came along the Ganges Valley. So those are some sculptures, masterpieces, coming from this Kushan period. So imagine the size is more or less the human size. So imagine my head, and it's the same size. Of course, as a specialist of ancient sculpture in the West, so familiar with Greek sculpture or Roman sculpture, you immediately see the heritage of Alexander the Great in the way to do it on a very realistic, of course, to use this stone, and to do very realistic faces with the importance of the eyes looking at you. So it's you have also almost psychology in this face. So any doubt for a specialist of Western sculpture, ancient Western sculpture, it's the heritage of Alexander the Great. And that is here the beginning of this story of Crossroads during this Kushan kingdom. So as I told you, we are during between the 1st and the 3rd century. Alexander the Great arrived in this region around the 4th century BC. So, of course, there was no big kingdom before the Kushan. The Kushan is really the first important kingdom in the region. And what we can see through those wonderful sculptures is that their cultural background is not from the East, but from the West. And even the languages, they had 2 languages, Greek languages and what we call Bactrian language. Bactrian language is from a region called Bactrian in the ancient time, in the time of Alexander the Great and after. That is more or less today Afghanistan. So the common language, and Bactrian was almost a Greek dialect. So, in fact, the background at this time in Central Asia, but in the Kushan kingdom, that, as I told you, goes until the north of India, was Greek language and Greek sculpture model. What is exceptional, it was very interesting for me to speak with the head of the Greek and Roman department at the Louvre, who is a specialist of Greek sculpture. He says, for me, it's awful to see those heads because the Parthenon in Athens is nothing compared to this. They are really masterpieces, and what is very rare also is that they are still painted. And so this is, of course, exceptional for such sculpture coming from the 1st century. The Kushan kingdom is also a very rich kingdom, and when you speak about this region and about Crossroads on the Silk Road, on the so-called Silk Road, it means, of course, cultural exchanges, but of course also we will come back to this idea later, economic exchanges. And when you see gold, that means that the Kushan were rich, and rich of exchanging through caravan roads things between east and west, and also because in this gold come from Afghanistan. For the north of Afghanistan, there is a gold mine in the region. So this treasure, called from the side Dalval-Zin Tepe, is called so the Dalval-Zin Tepe treasure. We were so lucky to have all the treasure, almost 60 pieces. That means when I told you we have 150 pieces in the exhibition, this is just one piece, but the treasure is composed of more or less 60 pieces. It was a wonderful discovery in the 90s, and to show you the trust that the Uzbek authorities had in our team, is that this treasure is not in a museum, it's kept in the National Bank, and no curators in Uzbekistan could have seen before this treasure. They had to come to Paris to see the Dalval-Zin Tepe. I don't have time to develop all the motifs you see on some of the jewelry, but you see, of course, included stones. You see also what we call the technique of filigrane. Maybe you will contest my opinion, and you can. But for me, as an Iranian art historian, it's really the influence of Iranian art. It's clear that the gold technique, like filigranes, started during 4th century BC in Persepolis, in many Persian capitals in Iran, and they learned it from the Greeks, and after from the Sassanid. So it's really an exchanges or a copy by Iranian from a Greco-Roman technique. And it was totally including in the Iranian culture. And it arrives during the Kushan Empire through Afghanistan to all Central Asia. And of course, I will see your reaction here as Indian, but I'm not very proud to say it in China, because the Chinese always say, no, we invented the gold filigranes techniques, etc. But this is just the demonstration, anyway, that it's here in the Kushan kingdom in the beginning of our, in the first centuries. Okay, so this was the first section of this exhibition, so devoted to the heritage of Alexander the Great. So something coming from the west and going to the east. Here, the second section, starting more or less during the 4th century, 5th century, was devoted to the really gold age of the Silk Road. So, of course, it's always useful when we speak about history or art history to see maps. So, of course, to contextualize, as I told you, the different roads that we could call Silk Road that really were developed after the Kushan, could go inside, on the north, on the red roads, those red roads are the roads going through Uzbekistan, because Uzbekistan, if I can show you with my, no, it's not a good idea, but it's between Persia and China, in north of India. This is the place of Uzbekistan. You see India, and just imagine on the north. And a focus on Samarkand, and so that you can also see the small geography. Of course, you see the so-called Silk Road goes from the capital of the Tang dynasty in China, that was Xi'an on the east, to Venice in the Mediterranean, and went through the Pamir Mountains and going through Samarkand and all this region of Uzbekistan. You don't see here Bukhara, but Bukhara is 150 kilometers west from Samarkand. So just to illustrate what is the Silk Road, it's caravans bringing a lot of things on camels going from east to west. And when you say Silk Road, you say also places in all cities, and here it's still in Samarkand. You have the market, and the market with the caravanserai around. The caravanserai were there as hotels for the merchants. So at this time, so from the 5th or 6th century, you have a lot of ceramics representing merchants on camels, and of course it's a very good symbol of what were those roads of merchants, bringing, of course, spices, bringing tea, bringing silk, because it's called the Silk Road, but of course there are many things a part of the Silk Road. But anyway, the textiles and the silk specifically are very important in this time. So, of course, as you can imagine, with the development of the roads, of the economic exchanges, you will have a real development of the cities. The cities in this country, for those who know Uzbekistan, the cities are called oases, because more or less Uzbekistan is what we call in French, I'm not sure in English, a half desert. It's not a desert like you can have north of China or in Africa. It's a desert with vegetation and with water, but very difficult landscape. And so cities can only be developed in where you have water. And so that is more or less the concept of oasis. And those oases were really the crossroads, the way where you could do market, business, exchanges, and the more popular today, of course, are Samarkand and Burara, who are really iconic and still today very important. So I wanted for such an exhibition, that is an event, you will never do a second exhibition like this. I wanted national treasures. That means that we had a big negotiation, because between the national treasures there are the wall paintings, the mural paintings. And the first one, you recognize the elephant and the white elephant on the red decor. comes from a city near Burara, near the Oasis of Burara, called Varaksha. And Varaksha, today when you go to Varaksha, it's an archaeological site. There is no modern life there. Varaksha was excavated by the Russian in the 70s, and he discovered at this time those mural paintings, and so big panels, of course with fragments, as you see, it was restored, but those panels of the red, the elephant scene that is reproduced all over the room came from a royal palace of Varaksha, and we think from the audience hall of the royal palace. So they have one panel in Uzbekistan, in the National Historical Museum in Tashkent, and 7 others in St. Petersburg. This is life of heritage also, because it was under, as I told you, Soviet rule. So St. Petersburg was the capital, and they bought panels. So I wanted, when you are curator of such an exhibition, you also are a diplomat. And so, because I like challenges, I wanted to bring together the panel coming from Tashkent with the other coming from St. Petersburg, saying we will rebuild the audience hall of the Royal Palace of Varaksha. And at this time, the director of St. Petersburg, that I know very well, said, okay, Yannick, you will have it. My luck was that his specialty, when he was a curator, was Uzbekistan art. So he excavated in Burara. So he agreed. But then, you remind that in February 22, the war with Ukraine started, and we had to cut all the diplomatic relations with Russia, and so I had to cancel the loans, and so we adapted. But of course, what this painting, if I want to be brief, shows, as I told you, other influences. We are no more in the in the Greek heritage or in the Western heritage. We arrive in an Eastern heritage or Southeastern heritage coming from India, and other heritage that we see in the other painting that is from the Samarkand Royal Palace from the same time. So we are more or less between the 6th and the 7th century. And this painting is called the Ambassador's Painting. In fact, we had a panel which was a miracle because no one wanted to put out of the museum a mural painting, but it took us 3 years of negotiation and helping with restoration on with modern techniques that make it very easy to take it because it's doubled on an aluminium panel. But what is interesting, of course, for us here is the subject. You see on a camel the king of Samarkand in a religious ceremony with animals around and with, of course, I know it, it's not obvious to see it, a priest. The priest is an Iranian priest. The official religion of Samarkand at this time was the Iranian religion called Zoroastrism. I think there is still here Zoroastrism. But you know it's Iranian religion at the beginning. So it's interesting for us to see, because the priests that walk around the camels have a mask, typically a mask of Iranian Zoroastrian priest. So of course it's the royal ceremony of celebration Zoroastrism, but what is also interesting in the painting that is classified in UNESCO World Monuments is you have 4 walls. It was like in the beginning for the Varaksha painting, it was a whole room. We don't know if it was the audience room hall or not, but this is the north wall, and on the other wall you have, on the west, you have Iranians. On the time of this painting, it was the Sassanid Empire in Iran. You have the Chinese, the Tang dynasty. You see the Chinese coming by boats with the Chinese emperor. So imagine you are in Samarkand and you see the painting with the Tang emperor. So that means that there was, at this time, this king in Samarkand had diplomatic relation with all the world. So this is the symbol of what I call the gold age of the Silk Road. It's really the most important time for this crossroad of different culture, Iranian one, Indian one, Chinese one, and of course developing silk industries. What is also important, when we speak about those exchanges, I spoke about culture, about economy, but as you may know, there was also exchanges or influences of religion. And during this period, it's really the development of Buddhism in Central Asia. And of course, it started more or less at the end of the Kushan kingdom. But really the gold age for this development of Buddhism in Central Asia, that is no more dominating now the religion. Of course, now it's Islam. But it's interesting to see, and those 2 masterpieces, maybe you could remark that the Buddha stone on the right was the masterpiece in the beginning of the exhibition, because it's a national treasure and it symbolizes in the historical museum in Tashkent the most important stone sculpture. And of course this is very exceptional with gold on the face. So Buddhism becomes, even if the king of Samarkand is Zoroastrian, becomes very, very influential. And of course, you can make the link with the history of Buddhism here during the same time in India. Okay, and the other subject of this time is the silk. And you have a wood panel here with merchant bringing silk with the god of silk symbolized as a merchant. And of course, for this time, it's very important. And here, it's right, the Chinese invented this Chinese industry, this silk industry, and brought it to the west, to Central Asia, southwestern Asia also, and an old painting from the 4th century in China shows all the technique of silk that was also brought to Central Asia. These are fragments from a a masterpiece of the Islamic art department at the Louvre. It's a silk. You can maybe check the inscription. It's difficult for you to imagine or to guess, but it's Arabic. And of course, it was a big textile of silk with a real Chinese technique, but we did chemical research, so it's proved that it was done in Central Asia with Chinese techniques. So it shows you how, by importing models, you slowly develop your own industry. And you see there are camels, but there are also elephants. And again, you see the mix of culture in these textiles, dated, done for the ruler of Samarkand. The date is 675, so it's during the 7th century. This silk art craft will go on in Central Asia, and it's not so common to find a kaftan later, coming from the 12th century, so after the arrival of Islam in Central Asia. But what is interesting is that the technique, the models, you guess maybe in this very bad photo, two birds, one looking at the other. Those are typical Chinese images. So it's not only the technique, but also the iconography that was imported to China. And to come to my last period, because of course this chronological time started with the first sequence, that is Alexander the Great heritage. Second, that is the golden age of the Silk Road. A third one, I didn't choose objects, was the arrival of Islam. And we had very few objects, but we had the oldest Quran, made the so-called Catalan-Gar Quran. And it was a real adventure because they asked us to restore it. And so we had to do it with the Imam, with the protection of the Imam. So there were everyday ceremonies during the restoration, but it was very nice to see how they trust on our French restorers to do it. So the most obvious element was this Catalan-Gar Quran. But of course, the arrival of Islam means they changes the languages. Arabic became a language there, Islam a religion, but never dominating everything. It was always with all the religions. They were very tolerant, so all the religion could develop next to the other. So this was the third section, and the fourth one, this one, of course, what we could call the modern one, that means between the 14th century to the 16th century, dominated by the figure of Timur. We say in the West, Tamerlan, but Tamerlan is a negative word for the Uzbek people. It seems he's, how do we say, boiteux? Yes, he was not very well shaped. So they wanted us to call him Timur, Amur Timur. It's still the national hero for them. But what is interesting, of course, for us, it's a very rich artistic period. And it's maybe the most important period for Iranian influence. You can see, of course, here some monuments from this Timurid time. Timur, because he also included Iran through the invasions. So when we speak in Islamic art history about Timurid art, it means an international Iranian art that, of course, is influenced by Iran, but going all through the Timurid Empire. And the most typical are two things: the architecture with the colored bricks. In the beginning, a mix of natural bricks and sometimes colored. And more you go to the 16th century, more it's colored everywhere, in blue, green, etc. It's very specific techniques with also the calligraphy included in the concept of architecture. And you also have the other real Timurid influence is on paintings, on miniatures. It's really the development of a very high quality of miniatures called the Bukhara school. The Bukhara school, I have seen wonderful things also here, so it's the same level. But the Bukhara school of paintings is really focused on the 16th century. And so, of course, the Louvre, my previous department, has the most important collection of Timurid, of Bukhara school paintings. And what was a surprise for me in the preparation of the exhibition, I could guess that I could find treasures in Uzbekistan, in museums or in libraries about Bukhara school. And in fact, they don't have anything or almost anything, because everything was, I suppose, sent to St. Petersburg or even sold on the market, but they don't have a lot. So we decided to lend them also. This was, we were lucky to have the door of Amur Timur tomb of Samarkand, which is a big monument that he built it for him, for his funeral, after his funeral. And this is the original door of the monument, because it's now in the Samarkand Museum. It's not more on the monument, but is a modern door. And just to finish, it's again a time with Chinese influences, of course still in silk textiles, but also in ceramics, and this very famous blue and white, usually of course typical of Chinese porcelain, is here in fact copied on, we found those two pieces in our excavation in Bukhara. So that's why we know that it was really not imported. I could say it's weaker than real Chinese blue and white. But we see that the ceramist wanted to copy some Chinese model. And this, which is a masterpiece, it's kept in Lisbon, in Foundation Gulbenkian. It's sum up all this question of artistical crossroad, because you have jade, of course, and the dragon that is Chinese influence. But the inscription on the vase is Arabic. So it's also a fabulous example of masterpiece produced with the influence of the two cultures in Central Asia, because the inscription has the name of a ruler of Samarkand, Ulugh Beg, that was just after Tamerlan, after Timur. So that's why we know that it's from Uzbekistan. So thank you. I hope that I give you a brief introduction, and thank you very much. And of course, I'm open to questions or remarks.
Thank you, Yannick, for this. The painting you showed of the Chinese silk, to me, I thought it was Japanese more than Chinese. And the long horizontal one. But is it that the influence between China and Japan was so much because that dress is what you find much later on in Japan, much more than in China?
Yes, I hope you don't have Japanese in this audience, but in fact, when you look at Japanese art, it's mainly Chinese influence. Of course, you have variety and regional styles, but in fact, the spirit of Japanese art is Chinese art. No doubt for me.
Revelation for me. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I have a question. It's to do with the fact that many of these original pieces are not in Uzbekistan. I was lucky enough to visit Fayez Tepe and Kara Tepe. And lucky enough to have as a guide a Russian who had stayed behind after the Soviet Union had fallen. He said he was a child in school when they opened one of these monastic caves. And he remembers to this day the colors that were so beautiful and bright. He said it lived in his memory, but he said everything had been taken by the Russians back to their own country. He was a Russian, but he mourned the loss of it. Later, we went to the museum in Termes, and there were very pretty, poor copies of it. Mm-hmm. So in the context of this, I want to ask, I know this is a recurring theme now. Is there, for someone like you, who specializes in the art of Asia, these questions about sharing these treasures with the countries that they came from, even if it's not an outright return, are these things that do come up in the context? Is it evolving the thought now? Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, it's a very important question. Maybe just to start to answer you about Fayez Tepe paintings, I can tell you because we could restore them for the exhibition. Of course, I didn't select here Fayez Tepe paintings, but we had Fayez Tepe paintings. The original are now in Termes. So it's no more the copies. So I don't remember the precise story when they came back, etc. But now in Termes, you have the original ones for Fayez Tepe. But of course, it was for me about the story of this Uzbek heritage in St. Petersburg. You have some in Moscow Oriental Museum, and mainly in St. Petersburg in the Hermitage. I didn't know if I could discuss about this with the Uzbek colleagues in the beginning. It was touchy, but you know, behind culture there is always diplomacy or politics. Because the relation between Russia and Uzbekistan are good, of course, you will never hear Uzbek official colleagues say it's a pity that everything is in St. Petersburg. But what I see is that they collaborate a lot. For instance, the Uzbek restorers we worked with in Samarkand, specialized in mural painting restoring were all trained by the Russian. And they still trust to the Russian science, and Russians still come for excavation in Uzbekistan. So the relations are good even in science and culture. So maybe to enlarge your question, what about the destiny of those artworks that are from a country and went in another one with the creation and development of museums? Of course, I can come back and have a lecture devoted to this. It's a complex question, and I think more and more an important question in our world today. So I will not tell you everything has to come back or anything has to come back. It's more complex, and like life, you have to find good ways. But what I like in my job as president in Musée Guimet, I feel like a cultural diplomat. That means I'm here in this very tensioned world to promote cultural dialogues. And it doesn't give a permanent solution, but we try. Next year, for instance, we will have a very big exhibition with Cambodia about Angkor collection. Abhishek, that knows Musée Guimet, knows that we have a very important collection coming from Angkor. So you could say in our world today, why doesn't it go back? But when we discuss with the Cambodian, and this is very important, I'm not sure that it will be the case in the future because everything depends on politics, but they are convinced that France played an important role in the past to keep heritage, because if those things would have been stay there, it wouldn't exist anymore. So they are conscious of it was not illicit traffic like some merchants or dealers organized after. It was really a scientific, archaeological program, and so that doesn't mean also that anything has to go back. Which now they want to renovate their national museum that was created by the French, and they have asked us in Musée Guimet to think with them to this new national museum, to the storytelling and so the list of works, etc. So for me, it's not impossible, but we can imagine the concept of sharing things. That means having maybe 4 years in one museum, 4 years in another museum. Because the question is always the same. Why do we keep heritage? Of course, for our universal memory or national memory, but also to share this culture, this art with others. And when you have millions of visitors coming in Paris and that can see this art, and in Cambodia, you don't have a lot of tourists going to Phnom Penh. They all go to Angkor. So you have maybe every day 10 or 15 visitors. So it's always, that's why I think that we can share and have 4 years in a museum, 4 years in it's one of the solutions, but there is no unique solution.
Thank you.
You know, just picking up there, this is a very contested topic though, because the Rubin Museum is now closing in New York, and most of their artifacts that belong to Nepal and that region is all going back. And I think it's becoming a very, it's a real hot topic, because there are more and more countries that are demanding in this whole post-colonial era that they return, because lots of these countries were looted and the colonizers sort of took stuff. So I think there is one argument about the archaeological sort of importance. But I think increasingly there is becoming this very political notion that, you know, these were stolen artifacts and they must go back to country of origin. So, right? So, I mean, I'm reading more and more about this. It's sort of, it's sort of a very big deal.
What I can say also, of course, all the American curators are my friends, but there is also a different reality in the United States than in France. Is when you see the processes that the American museums had, because now it's different, to acquire, they never analysis the provenance. And when we see, for instance, now all the restitution that the Americans Museum, the Metropolitan, the Cleveland, and many museums has to do to Cambodia, it comes from one collection, the one of Douglas Latchford, and who was a dealer. And it was really, it's proved illicit traffic. But the Met bought it, and they also bought Greek and Roman sculpture that they had to return to Italy. Of course, now everything has changed in those museums, and everyone is looking, even Christie, Sotheby's, everyone is looking about provenances. But they are in a more difficult situation than we in France. But this doesn't mean that we cannot have difficult situation also. We have to stay modest. And I want to develop, if I find money, I want to develop a research center about provenances in my second building in Paris, because we have 3 buildings. It will be what I call the Villa Guimet research center, mainly devoted to provenances research, because we have a lot of archives, like the City-Lou archives, that was a very important dealer in the middle of the 20th century. So our responsibility is to digitize those archives, to put them online, to open it to searcher. We have to share knowledges of history of the Asian art markets. And if we find something that is not honest, we have to return them. And without saying you the name, but there is a very important French collector of Asian art in Paris. He became a friend of mine, like often with collectors. We are from the same passion, the same word. And he wanted to give to the museum 2 sculptures from 2 heads, very high quality, coming from Angkor. And when we asked him some information about the provenance, it was not illicit traffic, because he arrived in France in the 30s, but from a site called Coquer, not far from Angkor. And Coquer was really, how do we say, pillé. Pilfered? Okay. So it was not sure. And I asked him, would you mind to return it to Cambodia? And he said, if you think that it's the thing to do, I say yes. So I negotiate for him with the Minister of Culture of Cambodia. And they were, of course, very happy to see our position, that we didn't just say yes, everything is clean, it's from the 30s, etc. We really wanted to ask completely the question of the... so I think it's nice to have such situations of respect.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and welcome, because I suppose that everyone goes regularly to Paris. Well, I hope you will have a chance to come to Paris for the Olympic Games or other things, but please come to Guimet. It's a so nice and so rich museum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lintz, for this wonderful talk. And thank you, everyone, for being such a wonderful audience. Now, our founder, Mr. Abhishek Podar, would like to give you a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you, Yannick. I'd just like to say, I visited Yannick just a few months back, and she immediately agreed to come down to MAP and do this talk for us. She was in India just about a fortnight back with President Macron, but she came back because she had made this commitment. And I think 2028 is the year of India and France, which Guimet is celebrating. So now we are hatching plans as to what MAP and Guimet can do together. So this is just the very beginning of our relationship. Thank you so much. It's a museum I love. I've been going there for the last 30, 35 years. And I think the common connection we have is Krishna Ribu. Yes. Thank you.